This is a summary repeat of the session we did at the induction day for the Supporting Teaching and Learning course, Level 2, just before Christmas. It's really aimed at the people who weren't able to attend the induction, but obviously is quite helpful for the people who were there as well. And do bear in mind that you will be given written assignments as you go through the course, and this will be one of the first ones that you get. It doesn't cover all the topics in that particular assignment, but it covers about half of it, and it's quite a significant half. So I do hope this will be helpful. If you have any questions, you've got my email address anyway. You will also get the tutor Devinder's email and contacts soon. You're welcome, and in fact should, contact us if you have any questions on safeguarding. Now, safeguarding is probably the most significant and the most important topic that you will learn on the course. It's absolutely vital for any member of staff working in a school to understand this, and this actually applies to us as well. It's vital for us to understand it and apply the principles, even though we work in adult education. And safeguarding usually applies to kind of public organisations such as schools, colleges, adult education, care homes, councils, nurseries, these kind of places. So it's quite important to know these things. If Ofsted come and visit your school, and if you're not sure who Ofsted are, you can ask me, ask Devinder, or ask the school when you join, because it is quite critical that you understand who Ofsted are. I mean, essentially they are the government inspectorate of schools. And as I'm making this recording, there's a lot of problems, issues, shall we say, with Ofsted, because I don't know whether you saw the news story about the head teacher about a year ago who actually took her own life because of the pressure of an Ofsted inspection. This was in Caversham near Reading about a year ago. So at the moment, the new Chief Inspector of Ofsted has stopped Ofsted inspections, but they will resume again towards the end of January. So I'm doing this on the 8th of January. 2024. It's worth knowing about this story. It's not a very happy story, but it will give you some of the background and perhaps help you understand the pressure perhaps that schools and other organisations do come under when it's time for Ofsted inspection. Now, as I was saying, if Ofsted inspect your school, one of the first questions they may well ask you and everybody else is about safeguarding. Do you understand it? Do you know what it is? Do you know how and why it's so important? But perhaps most of all, would you know what to do? Do you know what to do if you think there is a safeguarding issue with a child in your school? So I'm kind of hoping this session will at least give you the background on that. It goes through some of the legislation and it gives you some idea of what you need to do should you be concerned about a child's health, safety and well-being. I don't consider it to be a complete guide to safeguarding, to be frank with you. I think this is something that, well, it's certainly something that you should be inducted in as soon as you start your placements at the school, or if you work at the school, you should have already have received training on it. If either of those turn out not to be true, so you don't get inducted in safeguarding and or you work in a school but you've never been inducted in safeguarding, please do alert us straight away. It's absolutely vital that you get this information and that you know it and you understand it quite well and that you're comfortable with it. So do tell us. So what I'm going to go through is these topics: legislation and guidelines for safeguarding, how safeguarding is met through the policies and procedures of the school, different types of child abuse, and then actions to take if a child or a young person discloses, tells you that they are being harmed or abused in some way. And then towards the end, action to take if you're concerned that a colleague might be failing to comply with safeguarding or harming, abusing or bullying a child or young person themselves. Then also in the induction session, we did a little bit on defining e-safety and how it can be implemented in a school or college. And we did this by discussion. So this isn't part of this PowerPoint, but I'm going to upload some resources for you so you do understand this. So you know what the risks might be in online safety, use of IT, use of computers in schools, etc., etc. Right. So first up, just a bit of background on like where and when safeguarding actually started, because it's still a relative new concept. It's not a concept that applies to every country in the world, although it does apply to most of the, what you might call the developed nations, Europe, America, Australia, etc., etc. And in the UK, it started around 1999, and I'll come back to you in a sec on the kind of acts that were started in that kind of time. But actually, it kind of really took off from an appalling incident in a small village, I think in Cambridgeshire, or certainly East Anglia, the east of England, called Soham in 2002. And you might have heard this name, Soham. And it involved, have I got a picture here? Hang on one second. Yeah, there you go. It involved this gentleman who's now currently serving a long sentence in prison. This is Ian Huntley. And his then girlfriend, Maxine Carr, was a teaching assistant in the school, and he was the caretaker of the same school. And the story goes something like there were two young girls, Jessica and Holly, and they went to buy sweets or something in the local sports centre, and he lured them into his house, saying that the teaching assistant, who they knew was in the house and wanted to talk to them, and he murdered both of these children and hid their bodies. I don't know the details of the rest of the story, but this is really when things started to change, and there started to become a realisation that these things could happen, that these things were going on, and that the government needed to do something to protect children and in fact vulnerable adults against physical abuse. There was actually another famous case. Have I got this here? Yeah, oh sorry, I can't go back on my slides in a recording. Right, I'm going to have to do this from memory. I can't remember the year, there was a young child, very young child, Victoria Climbier, and she came over from somewhere in Africa and was looked after by relatives. I think it was her aunt. And her aunt, or maybe it was her great aunt, along with her partner, I think, abused that child over a number of years. Apparently there were bruises, marks of being tied up. The child was half starved to death, quite literally, and she died, I'm afraid, in February 2000 at the age of only 8 years old. And a lot of what arose from this case was the fact that loads of different organisations, agencies had kind of been involved in this. So you're talking about, social services, police, kind of care agencies, this kind of thing, but none of them had talked to each other. So the clues have been kind of missed, and that bigger picture was never built up. Do look this up if you're interested. It's Victoria Climbier. Again, a very sad occurrence, but also something very famous and something perhaps you should know about. And the legislation that kind of happened around that time was called Working Together to Safeguard Children. This is the one that started around 1999. So it kind of outlined how agencies, practitioners, people working with children and families should kind of work together to ensure that children and young people remain safe from harm. And this was the kind of start of it. The Soham inquiry led to the government's Every Child Matters paper. So you might hear Every Child Matters, and it's a paper, so it's not legislation itself, but it proposed changes in legislation and policy to maximise those opportunities for everyone to work together. And that paper became the Children Act 2004, which I'm sure Davinder will take you through again because it's quite important elsewhere in what we do. And that's what placed the duty in all the agencies, all the relevant agencies, to work together to make arrangements to safeguard and promote the welfare of children. What perhaps applies to us more directly working in schools these days is what they call keeping children safe in education. So it's KCSIE, and you can see I've done a tiny little picture of it there. You can easily download this online. You can Google it and you can download it, but I will also provide you with a link in case you can't find it. Anybody who works directly with children must at least read part 1 of this guidance. Now, even part 1 is fairly long. It's something like 40 pages long. But in fact, I'm going to take you through some of the points here, so it won't be totally new to you, but you do need to read this. This is very important. And it's important because you need to understand your safeguarding responsibilities, how you keep children safe and what your role is in that, and just knowing what processes to follow if you are concerned. So let's just go back a step. What is safeguarding? Now, this is a definition I've got from one of the presentations I do for my adult learners on other courses. But the CQC, that's the Care Quality Commission, so these are almost like Ofsted, these are the people who look after care homes, hospitals, that kind of thing. It's about enabling people to live free from harm, abuse and neglect. And I think if there were just 3 words that you could remember from safeguarding, remember those 3: harm, abuse and neglect, because that kind of summarises everything that safeguarding is about. It's also about protecting people's health, but about protecting people's well-being and protecting human rights as well. So there's that broader kind of interpretation of safeguarding above and beyond harm, abuse and neglect. So in practice, it's about taking reasonable measures to try and make sure that the risks of harm, abuse and neglect to children and to vulnerable adults are minimised as far as possible. So what I want you to understand from this is you are not responsible for ensuring that you're not responsible for ensuring that harm, abuse and neglect never happens to a child. That can't be your responsibility. What is your responsibility is to monitor for it, to look for it, to be aware of what it's about, and then to take reasonable measures to make sure the risks are reduced as far as possible. So the reasonable measures are what we've already described: knowing what safeguarding is, knowing what kind of things to look for, knowing what a typical safeguarding scenario might look like, and knowing what actions to take. Yeah. So this is taking reasonable measures. If you have a concern, it's about taking immediate and appropriate action to address those concerns, and you can see it's immediate action and appropriate action to address those concerns. So it's working on it straight away. So it's about protecting children from maltreatment, poor or bad treatment, preventing the impairment of children's mental and physical health or development. So it's about taking away something that might stop a child developing naturally, developing normally, reaching normal milestones in their physical development, their mental development, their development of learning, etc., etc. And it's about ensuring that children grow up with safe and effective care. So that's your role in the classroom, is being part of that body of people, if you like, who ensure that children grow up safely and have effective care to support them. and it's taking action to enable children to have the best outcomes that they possibly can. So you can think of this in terms of a child-centered approach, and this is obviously kind of quite a key approach. Yeah, who are the most important people in a school? Well, the head teacher might think it's the head teacher, but actually it's not. It's the children. The children are clearly the most important people in the school. That's what it's all about. So staff, which includes you, should always act in the best interests of the children in the school. So you're looking up to their best interests. So a quick definition, going back to the Children Act, a child in need is a child who's unlikely to have a reasonable level of health or development. I mean, the actual explanation is a lot longer than that, but I think that's a good little thing to remember. A child who is unlikely to have a reasonable level of health or development. Excuse me. So having that child-centered approach means that everyone who comes into contact with the child, and perhaps the families as well, takes on that responsibility and ensures that at the heart of everything that happens is the child's best interests. So how would you do that? Well, you would get to know the child's needs, get to know the child's circumstances, so that child, and again possibly the families, receive the right help, the help that they need, the right help at the right time. You're in a position, perhaps when you know the child well and the families, to pick up on things quite early on. Yeah, so you might identify the concerns early on in the process, which prevents them from getting worse, prevents them from escalating. So you need to provide that safe environment for children, and you should be prepared to identify children who need early stage help, i.e. what we just said, providing support as soon as a concern shows itself, emergencies. Yeah. And I put this bit in red. It's vital, and we've already said it, but it's vital that any staff member who has a concern follows the school's safeguarding policy. Yeah, so we'll go later into what that might be. All schools should have what they call a DSL, a designated safeguarding lead. And this person, their role is to provide that support to staff and liaise with other services regarding any child who you might have concerns about. So don't feel that you're on your own with this. You really, really are not. In some schools, the school I was working with last summer, where the DSL, that was, in fact, in that school, only job. That's what they did 24/7. In that school, it was a special SEN school, special needs school. And the person there, that's what they did 24/7. In other schools, it may well be that the DSL has another role, but a significant part of their role is being the designated safeguarding lead. And in most of the schools I've visited recently, if you go into the foyer, you'll see a big photo board of all the staff, so you know who everybody is, but there's often a little separate one just next to it or underneath it, and it shows you all the people who have responsibilities for safeguarding, which often includes the head teacher, in fact probably always includes the head teacher, but you will also see the DSL. You see the DSL identified and anybody else who's responsible for safeguarding. So when you get to your schools, do have a look, have a look, see who's on those boards and see who it is that you can go to for support. So that DSL has that more complete picture. It's got a more rounded picture of what's going on, knows the law better, knows the school's policies better, because that's their job, and can respond more appropriately to safeguarding concerns. And as we said, other members of the senior leadership and or pastoral teams can also offer their support, and we'll come back to that in a moment. As we kind of said, all staff should be aware of the systems for safeguarding and be given this at an induction. I've said to you, please tell us if you're not. Be provided with the safeguarding policies. So it may well be that you're given a link to a training area which has all the safeguarding policies in, or they might print them out for you. So there may be a child protection policy, a behaviour policy, a staff behaviour policy, and of course part 1 of keeping children safe in education. You should also be updated regularly. Yeah, regularly might be monthly, might be bi-monthly. I'm not sure exactly how this happens in schools, to be honest. But you should get regularly updated safeguarding and child protection training, including for the online things, because this is becoming more and more important. Online safety is becoming so significant, as well as any updates on safeguarding and child protection law, policies and procedures. So be aware of the school's early help process, as we said before, and understand what your role might be in that process, i.e. what we just said, that early monitoring. You're the people who know the children best. You work with them every day. So you could be really key in helping a child to not have to undergo a safeguarding issue. And then, as we said, be aware of what to do if a child does tell you that they're being abused or neglected. So what signs might you see that a child is being abused? And we actually did this as a large group work session in the induction class, and actually the groups came up with more answers than are even in this PowerPoint. But again, this is fairly easy to look up. But here's some clues for you. So they might be withdrawn from friends or usual activities. So it might be that they've kind of gone quiet, they're not joining in things. Might be other changes of behaviour. They might get more aggressive, more rebellious. They might be angry. They might be hyperactive, or their performance in class in school might have dropped. They could be depressed or sad, anxious, or have unusual fears. I mean, everyone and all children have fears, but I'm talking about an unusual level of fears. Sudden loss of self-confidence, not feeling so confident about themselves. Problems at night, sleep problems, nightmares. A lot of absences from school, a notable number of absences from school, untreated medical problems or medical problems that keep coming up over and over again, always seem to be ill, never seem to quite recover or get ill regularly. Incontinence, so problem with their toileting. There might be unexplained injuries, so bruises, broken bones, fractures, cuts, burns. Or injuries that don't match the explanation given, so what they tell you doesn't seem to quite tie up with the injury that you can see. Injuries that aren't compatible with the child's developmental ability, so an injury that you'd only get if you were kind of more advanced mentally or physically than you actually are. There could be sexual abuse or symptoms, so it might be sexual behaviour or even understanding or knowledge of sexual activity that's not appropriate for that child's young age. Pregnancy in potentially an older child, or sexually transmitted disease. Pain in the anal or genital regions, bleeding or injury. A simple statement by the child that he or she was sexually abused in some way, that the child is exhibiting inappropriate sexual behaviour with other children in the class. It could be neglect. So do you remember what we talked about, harm, abuse and neglect? So neglect could be like poor growth, excessive weight with medical complications, poor personal cleanliness, lack of clothing or supplies to meet physical needs, hoarding or stealing food, poor record of school attendance, lack of appropriate attention for medical, dental or psychological problems, or lack of necessary follow-up care. I think I've got another slide on this later, which is why I've gone through this quite quickly. So these are kind of signs that are not being properly looked after. So why would a child have poor growth? Well, perhaps because it wasn't being fed properly. Why would a child have excessive weight? Because it's being fed the wrong foods. Yeah. Poor personal cleanliness, I think is obvious. Hoarding or stealing food because they're hungry. Poor record of school attendance because nobody's looking after them or checking up on them. Lack of attention, as we kind of indicated before, for an illness, a health problem, a teeth problem, etc., etc. Yeah. Sometimes the parent's behaviour itself is a red flag. It's a warning sign. So if a parent shows little concern for their child, or even appears unable to recognise that there are physical, emotional problems or distress in the child, A parent who blames the child for their problems. A parent who often belittles, berates, or makes the child feel small, uses negative terms such as worthless, evil, bad, this kind of thing, or even expects the child to kind of parent the parent, expects the child to provide attention and care to their own parent. A parent uses harsh physical discipline, so perhaps some kind of physical discipline, slapping or smacking. A parent who limits the child's contact with other people, with other children. Going back to the mismatch between the injury and the explanation for the injury, so it offers stories that don't tie up or conflict with each other about why the child is injured. Or conversely, it actually brings the child for a lot of medical examinations, takes the child to the doctor a lot and asks for tests, x-rays, lab reports, etc., for concerns that aren't actually evident. They don't actually appear to be there. So you should be particularly vigilant for any, well, extra vigilant for any people who is disabled, has certain health conditions or specific additional needs, educational needs and mental health needs, and you should be alerted to these kind of things and to who these children might be by your class teacher or possibly other support staff in the school. Is a young carer themselves. There are young people who care for their siblings or for their parents, officially or unofficially. Is showing signs of antisocial or criminal behaviour, including involvement in gangs. Now, this is an increasing problem with children in gangs, children at risk of slavery, modern slavery, children who have been trafficked, children who are being sexually or criminally exploited, or being radicalised or exploited to extreme ways of thinking. So perhaps quite often that this is linked to Islamic extremism, but isn't necessary this by any means. This could be somebody who's linked to right-wing extremism, left-wing extremism, animal rights, ULEZ cameras these days. This kind of thing. A radical view of something that they don't agree with. A child who's frequently missing or goes missing from care or from their own homes, is in a family where the challenges are particularly notable, such as drugs, alcohol misuse, mental health issues in adults, domestic abuse, or is potentially even misusing drugs or alcohol themselves. So there's a lot to look out for. Also is at risk of honour-based type abuse, such as FGM. I'm not sure whether you've come across FGM, female genital mutilation or forced marriage. This happens in certain cultures. If you're not familiar with either of these, do please look it up so you know what this is about. So let's go back to the DSL. Your designated safeguarding lead can and should always be sought. Advice from these people should always be sought. Yeah. A lot of these issues are very, very complex. They're not always that easily defined. It's not always black and white what these issues are. And in some cases, a safeguarding problem can overlap with another safeguarding problem, or it could overlap with a mental health issue or an issue around physical health or something like that. So quite often the issues come together. Children may also be at risk of harm outside of the school, so you're not necessarily going to see evidence of what's going inside the school. There might be evidence of something that's happened after school. And as we've just kind of said, it might go as far as sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, and serious youth violence, but obviously not limited to these. And also, as we've also said elsewhere, the IT/internet can pose increasing risks now in forms of online abuse. I'm not sure how much you are aware of this, and if you've got children yourselves, just how much they might be at risk of suffering from this, or perhaps already told you about this. But a lot of bullying apparently these days is not physical anymore; it's online. So you might regard that as just online teasing, but it's not. It can be very, very serious, and it can ruin people's lives. And in some cases, the abuse might be happening both in person and online at the same time, and might even be carried out by other children, which is something we'll come back to in a short moment. So, sexual abuse, I'm going to leave you to, I don't want to press too many bullet points because I can't go back on it. Let me just try one more. No, I'm really sorry. Can you go back to that slide when you have a moment and press pause and just read what sexual abuse might be about? It's quite scary, to be honest, but it is something sadly you need to be aware of. Neglect is constantly failing to meet child's basic physical or psychological needs, which we've already kind of been through. So it could be the parent carer failing to provide adequate food, medication, clothing and housing, which we said, failing to protect your child from a safeguarding issue, physical, emotional abuse, failing to supervise that child, including even perhaps use of the wrong person for caregiving, babysitting, this kind of thing. Failing to nurture a child's basic emotional needs, so failing to support that child in the emotional needs that they have as they grow up. Failing to ensure access to medical care treatment, we said, and this could actually include during pregnancy as well, pregnancy of the adult. So just coming back to something we said a moment ago, be aware that children can abuse other children. And now this is quite a new kind of theme, and this is something that Ofsted might even ask you about. This is called child-on-child abuse. And even if there are no reports in schools, even if you've never heard of child-on-child abuse in your school, it may just be the case that people are yet to be aware of this, and it's not yet being reported. So even at this kind of basic level, that just saying that sexual harassment is just a joke, just having a laugh, part of growing up, or boys being boys, that can lead to that kind of culture of unacceptable behaviour. So this becomes normalised. This kind of harassment becomes normalised, and then there's an unsafe environment for children. As nobody takes that as a serious issue. So you need to understand this as well. Don't look to downplay certain behaviours that might be viewed as perhaps teasing, because this is actually sexual harassment, or rather can be sexual harassment. So in that worst case, you're part of a culture that normalise abuse, leading to children accepting that kind of abuse as normal, and then nobody comes forward to report it. Nobody brings it up. And of course then that can escalate and get completely out of control. So child-on-child abuse could include bullying, and as we said, cyber bullying, discriminatory bullying, abuse in an intimate relationship between peers. Now obviously this course isn't just about children, it's about young people as well. Physical abuse, which as we said may involve an online element to the abuse. Sexual violence or assault, which again may also be online. Sexual harassment, like we just said, the comments, the jokes, the online teasing. Making somebody engage in sexual activity without consent. And upskirting. I'm not sure whether you've heard of upskirting, but this is essentially where somebody sticks a mobile phone camera looking upwards under a skirt, and then post this on social media or what have you. FGM, now we said we'd come back to FGM a short while back, and this is kind of quite serious. There's actually a legal concern around FGM. You should speak to your DSL with any concern you have about FGM, but there's a specific legal duty on you. If you find out that FGM has been carried out on a girl under the age of 18, you must report this to the police. It's a criminal offence not to do so. Whether that's you directly or the DSL, I'm not entirely sure, so do make sure you understand your own school's policy on this, but it must be done, it cannot be ignored. Excuse me. So you should observe and be aware of your children's day-to-day behaviours to identify who might be a risk, or perhaps who are experiencing mental health difficulties. Now, mental health is an issue that's cropped up, become much more prevalent, especially since lockdown. There were children who were born kind of during that period, or were growing up and developing during that period, who do experience quite severe mental health problems because of that isolation, because of the lack of contact, and perhaps the reduction in self-confidence, the reduction in interaction with children of their own age, etc., etc. So it is something we do have to look out for, but we have to bear in mind that the diagnosis of mental health problems must be done by trained professionals. So actually, similarly to most things within safeguarding, you might get a clue that there's a problem, but you're not actually the person responsible for diagnosing it and deciding that it is a problem. You're the person responsible for flagging it up with somebody else. So if you have mental health concerns, as well as safeguarding concerns, go to your DSL. There'll be a child protection policy for your school, and they will tell you how and where to do this. If a child makes a disclosure to you, so if a child actually comes and tells you that there is a problem, rather than you just suspecting it from the signs that we kind of looked at earlier on, you need to maintain the appropriate confidentiality, only involving those who need to be involved, such as the DSL or the social care officer for the child, and obviously in your case probably the teacher. One thing you should never ever promise to do is to tell the child that you won't report this abuse or tell anybody else. It might sound slightly strange, because usually when people come to you with problems, you want to say, yes, I'll keep this in confidence, but not in this case. You are obliged to report that as abuse. You are obliged to report that abuse. And you need to make it clear to the child that that is what's going to happen, but that they are now in a situation that they can trust, and they have somebody who will take care of their best interests. Yeah. So if you keep it confidential, this may well be actually not in the best interest of the child. In fact, it may be very, very detrimental to the child if you don't report this. So you should reassure the child, the child who made an allegation, that they will be the allegation will be taken seriously, but that the child will be supported and the child will be kept safe. This is what you need to say to your child. And you should also ensure at the same time that they understand they're not causing a problem. They're not making things difficult, and that they shouldn't feel ashamed, and they've done the right thing by reporting the abuse. The action that then could take place is that the school's usual wellbeing and pastoral systems are used to support the child. It may be that an early help assessment is done by the DSL, and it may well be that the child is then referred to the statutory services, the services outside of the school, who can kind of help and support. So I haven't said this here, but one thing you shouldn't be doing is investigating further. It's not your job. You're not the detective. You're not the person getting the statements. You are simply relaying what you have heard to the DSL to make sure something gets done. Yeah. Do not probe. Do not try and do something quietly just because you think you're being helpful to the child. It's got to go. It's got to be reported. Yeah. Think on these lines. It could happen here. It could happen in this school. It could happen in this class. Don't ever assume it wouldn't be possible to happen. Act immediately. Follow the protection. Follow the child protection policy. Speak to your DSL. Never assume that somebody else is doing it. So much better to report it twice than not at all. Yeah. and obviously kind of getting that early information from different sources may well help the DSL create a better kind of picture. If you cannot find the DSL, or there's a deputy DSL and you can't find them, don't hold back on it. Go and find the most senior member of staff you can. Yeah, it needs to be reported. Yeah, don't think, I'll do that tomorrow or next week. It needs to be reported. If you have concerns about another member of staff, including volunteers or other teaching assistants, teachers, non-teaching staff, posing a risk, posing a safeguarding risk to children, then you need to refer this to the head teacher or the principal of the school. If, however, the concern is about the head teacher or the principal, you should report this to the chair of governors. So you might need to find out who the chair of governors is, but that should be public information, to be frank. So, question for you. If you saw a child being hit or slapped in a supermarket, are you legally obliged to intervene? Are you legally obliged to do anything about it? I'll let you think about that one for a second. Actually, when we did this with the group, they actually got this right. You're not legally obliged to do anything because it's not within your school environment. So it's not within those environments we talked about before, schools, colleges, adult education, care homes, councils, this kind of thing. Would you want to intervene? Well, morally or ethically, you might feel you want to do that. It'd be a very hard thing to watch a child being slapped in the supermarket and just walk past. I think you should also consider the risk to yourselves. If you intervene, and you intervene in the wrong way or at the wrong time or with the wrong person, that may well result in bad consequences for yourself. So it's a tricky one. I don't actually think there is a definitive answer. I would like to think that I wouldn't walk away. That's what I'd like to think. But just judge for yourself. Just look at the circumstances. Right, nearly at the end. In the same way that you're kind of responsible for looking after monitoring the safeguarding of the children in your care, we're kind of the same for you. So if you feel that you are any of these things, so you're not able to cope with things that perhaps you think might be regarded as normal, or perhaps you yourself are feeling anxious or depressed, sleep problems, anxiety, depression, if you're feeling frightened of something or you feel you're in danger, if you feel you are being sexually or physically exploited or financially exploited, if you're not eating well or unable to afford food, if you're unable to afford clothing or other life's necessities, including medicine, or effectively homeless, perhaps sleeping on friends' sofas, sofa surfing, then you can come to us, and it may well be that we're able to do something about this. So that's our kind of safeguarding responsibility towards you. Also drinking or using drugs excessively. Yeah. And I think the thing to say here is, we went through a lot of the signs and symptoms that a child might be being abused. And I asked the class at the time, if you saw those signs and symptoms, does that mean the child is being abused? And of course the answer is no. It's simply a sign or symptom that it is possible that they are being abused. So if you see a child has a bruise, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a safeguarding issue. It just means if you see a bruise this week and another one next week and another one next week, then you're building that picture. You're building that picture of what's going on. And maybe it's just that child bruises easily. Some people do. But if there's bruises and cuts and the child is kind of not talking to anybody anymore, do you see how you're building that picture? There might be that kind of concern. So don't automatically think just because you see something going on that it is a safeguarding issue, but you're looking for that picture. You're looking perhaps for a change in the child. So was the child incredibly bubbly and talkative and now is just withdrawn and just wants to sit by themselves and not talk to anybody? So it's about changes really as much as the signs and symptoms. So what will you take away from this? Have a think about what you've just learned. Have a think about all those kind of main themes that you've just kind of gone through, your responsibilities, the signs, what it is you need to do, and perhaps some of the legal acts that we talked about at the front of the presentation, which you can look up further, and the policies and procedures that you are likely to be given in the school. And when you get them, read them and know them. So essentially this is what we said at the start. We said we go through legislation and guidelines for safeguarding, which I think we've done. We went through how safeguarding is met through those policies and procedures. We talked about the different types of abuse. We talked about the action to take if a child or a young person discloses harm or abuse, and the actions to take if you think somebody else is or isn't behaving appropriately. Sorry, if somebody else, i.e. another member of staff, is or isn't behaving appropriately concerning safeguarding harm or abuse of a child or young person in the school. The only bit we didn't do was the e-safety, but as I said, I will find you something on that and I will get that uploaded so you're aware of e-safety. And as I said at the start, you are going to get some written questions on these, not immediately. So what I'd like to think you could do is to talk to people about safeguarding, to look at the policies and procedures so you get a much more rounded appreciation of what safeguarding is, what your responses might be, who you could go to, and in what circumstances you should go to them, and then the kind of support or monitoring you could do around that once you're actually in your placements, because that's, I think, where it becomes a little bit more real. And as I said at the start, you've got our contact details. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns, anything like that on safeguarding or any other issue, to be frank, connected to your course, then do please get in contact.